first post-lunch session of the day on our final day. Does that make anyone sad? Makes me a little sad. But time moves on, time moves forward. And I don't remember how we arranged this.
Well, it was via Twitter.
I was going to say, I think, yeah, you follow me on Twitter, I follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, funny story. So, NHL playoffs last year. New York Rangers, Ottawa Senators, sadly lost. It equaled an invite, better luck next year. It's not going to happen, but...
That's right. So this started over a hockey thing. Yeah. That's kind of funny. And then at some point I probably said, you know, you were saying something interesting. I said, yeah, you should come speak at MacTech conference. So yeah, please welcome first-time presenter, and I'm not going to get your last name.
Ciliberti.
I'm glad I didn't try that, because there's a hidden chip in there. Meg Ciliberti.
Alright, so as my slide says, today we're going to be talking a little bit about some lessons in growth and ambiguity, with a lot of specific examples from my past year, which we'll get into. First, we'll go over a little agenda. I'm going to introduce you a little bit to me, as well as the company I work for, which is Shopify. We're going to talk about my specific team at Shopify, which is IT, and some of the things that we've struggled with as we've grown quite a bit. We're going to learn to deal with ambiguity, and how learning to deal with the unknown can actually be a huge, huge skill that if you can master, will help you as you grow. We're going to talk about what spotting the gray rhino means, and a little kind of preview, I guess you could say, is if you learn how to deal with things before they hit you, it can actually help you. And finally, we'll talk about the concept of anti-fragility, which means every time you break something, it could get stronger, which is also a good thing. So like I said, hello, I'm Meg, for those of you I haven't met yet. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. I don't know if there's any other Canadians in the house or not. Yes, welcome. While I was there, I spent about 11 years working for Apple in a variety of roles in training, in tech support, leadership. I did some stints in Cupertino with some internal apps QA, which was fantastic. I now live in Ottawa, Canada, which is considerably colder. If you've never heard of Ottawa, by the way, it's the capital of Canada. It's Canada's Silicon Valley. And we're known for a couple things. First and foremost, beaver tails, which is Canada, right? So it's Canada's equivalent to a churro. They're amazing, super fantastic. We're also known for the Ottawa Senators. Again, please don't tell me you're a Leafs fan. That's a normal thing for you. And we're also known for Justin Trudeau, who is our Prime Minister. Yeah, I do hear that you guys are some big fans of his, but we're not going to get into that. Then you can see he's wearing a Shopify hoodie, and he actually participated in an event for Hour of Code last year. It was really great. He did an AMA, where he got this hoodie, and I actually got to ask him a question in front of the entire company, and that was actually my first day, so it set the bar a little high. It was a little nerve-wracking. But Ottawa is also home to Shopify. So we are a Canadian-based platform, and we build tools to sell online, we sell in person, we sell via social media channels, through conversational commerce, even by Frenzy, which is our app for flash sales. And we were actually recently named one of the top 3 tech companies to work for by Bloomberg, alongside SpaceX and Google. Shopify is dedicated to making commerce better for everyone. And we actually really do mean everyone. This means anyone from your aunt who makes homemade pottery or soaps, all the way to merchants like Kylie Jenner, General Electric, Red Bull, Adidas, Movement. You can pretty much name it. We pretty much help all of those people. And what we believe is we want to take the path that leads to more entrepreneurs, always. So just how many are we roughly talking about? We have over 500,000 merchants currently on our platform, and they're based in 175 countries around the world, which is pretty incredible. But inside of Shopify, we have well over 2,000 employees, like well over that. And we're in 6 offices around the world. Plus remote employees actually all over the world as well, pretty much in every place you can think of. Now at Shopify, we live by 5 key values. They're actually a huge part of the culture at Shopify. They're hung on the walls. And they are simplicity. So Shopify believes that we need to strive to take the simplest solution, or to find the simplest solution rather, to all problems, even the most complex ones. thrive on change. It's a pretty big one. We really celebrate what we call successful failure because we believe that it makes us stronger. Act like an owner. Magic happens when people care really deeply about the things they work on. And Shopify really trusts that whoever they hire is the absolute best at what they do. Build for the long term. Just think about the bigger picture in everything you do. And finally, get shit done. It's pretty self-explanatory, but in a way, I guess you can say Shopify will give you the tools to get the job done. The rest is up to you. They will literally give you a computer and say, go do it. Everyone's an adult. These 5 things are not really just values, they're actually what's valued at Shopify, and we really truly do embody these in everything we do, whether it's a line of code that we push, every process, everything. They apply in so many different ways to not only us or my team, but I would probably say if any of you are on a team that is experiencing growth, you could probably relate to a lot of these things, and they apply to you as well. So we'll talk a little bit about my team. Now, as I said, I'm the IT lead for Shopify. And the idea for this session kind of came about after discussing with one of my colleagues what it looks like for our team to have its head above water or underwater. And I thought to myself, what does an ideal situation look like? Like this. So when I think about our perfect world or my perfect world, I imagine maybe floating away in a lazy river, you got a drink in your hand, nothing's on fire, everything's automated perfectly. It's a utopia, right? But more often than not, it feels like this. That is not me, by the way, but I do not know how to swim, so it very well could be me. But this could be systems that are breaking for no reason, repairs are piling up, things that worked a month ago don't work now, and you have no reason why. Maybe your Slack notifications are in the double or triple digits. It can be really difficult to stay afloat throughout all of this, and it can feel like your head is not above water all the time, because with some growth comes some growing pains. Now, Tim Westergren, who's the founder of Pandora, said that with growth, you should just be prepared for a long and often uncertain journey, because the good stuff doesn't come easy, and he really was right. When you're a small team or company, majority of your things work as expected, so you kind of feel like emoji number 1, right? But as you start to grow more, maybe things don't work so hot. For us, it could be your ticketing workflow needs to be reevaluated to account for more teams. Maybe, like Kelly said this morning, you're thrust into a new role with kind of not even really knowing what the first thing you need to do is. Once you grow a lot more like that, you start to feel like the last emoji guy there. Sometimes I feel like him. So I want to give you some specific examples so you kind of know a little bit what I'm talking about. So the first is repair and inventory management, or lack thereof. This was a huge, huge area for my team when I started. So a long time ago, the team was using Post-it notes to label what to do with their machines. Throw a Post-it note on it if it was broken. If it needed a repair or needed to be moved somewhere else, throw a Post-it note on it. I was so sure when I actually started, by the way, a year ago, that someone must have had stock in 3M, because there was actually no explanation for why there was a Post-it note on everything. But what I quickly found was that this situation actually wasn't born out of laziness, but rather it was a Band-Aid solution to a problem that no one had time to fix. There were a lot of warning signs that something like this would become a bigger issue, but due to things like not having enough time, not having enough people, they were ignored. So I had reached out to someone on my team and said, hey, share some examples of how things were before I started or before the team started to grow, and I got a picture like this. Things are organized really well, but if you had a really high-functioning HVAC system, those Post-its would be gone, right? And so I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. There was a Post-it note. It literally never ended. I could have done a whole presentation on Post-its, but... So then we decided it was time to get shit done. So in the process of needing to get shit done, this is what we came up with. A Google Sheet. It's amazing. It's so fantastic. Imagine for every repair, you open this up, you copy and paste your serial number into it, then you reference that model number in the JSS, then you copy and paste each one of those lines into it. It was super scrappy, it was super crappy, but it got some stuff done, right? But then we decided it was time to get some shit fixed. So here's what we did. Get Shit Fixed is actually a homegrown Ruby on Rails app that was developed by our senior IT specialist, Marek Lubansky. He is on Mac admins, but he is quite shy, so I encourage all of you to reach out to him. I think it's at Marek. And we use Get Shit Fixed every day. We run reports from it. We run audits from it. They get sent to Slack on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, depending on what we're auditing. So for my team, we actually do a bi-weekly half-day Jamf audit, where we go through everything and we clean up things like last check-in issues, enrollment issues, lack of encryption, and this tool helps us figure out what our priorities actually are. It also includes some repair tools, so it gives us the ability to create those tickets that we talked about earlier in an automated way, and it also creates a traveler for us. It appends some extension attributes into the JSS, so it's, again, automating things a little bit easier for us. And it's also got some really simple dashboards. Now, if you can't really see this because it is small, I promise we don't have people on 10.11. It's a little outdated. It also, Get Shit Fixed will connect with things like our internal project board, our GitHub repos. It really does embody the true meaning of each one of those values that I showed you at the beginning, and in the process has become invaluable to my team. We literally could not live without this tool. So hardware and inventory management is getting a little bit better. It's not perfect, but it's a long ways from copying and pasting into a Google Sheet or a Post-it. But what about software? At Shopify, we use a ton of different SaaS solutions. And when the team was much, much smaller and the company was much smaller, this was a little bit easier to manage and audit. But now it's really difficult to keep track of who's using what. We don't restrict people from using certain apps. We're a really default open culture. We're a very trusting culture. We understand people like choice, and it's not uncommon to have maybe 5 or 6 different versions of different tools being used. Like, I think we have 6 or 7 different project management tools last time I checked, and that's the ones we know about. So before we implemented any type of MDM solution or self-service solution, we used literally a Google Sheet to manage our inventory. And you saw how many people work for Shopify. It was actually almost impossible to do this. There was a ton of room for error in this process. We had no visibility into what apps people were using, so which meant we couldn't reuse licenses if someone left, and even worse, we couldn't really revoke a license if someone left, which could actually be a huge security risk as well. So what did we do? Well, we went out and we found ourselves a Jamf expert. If anyone has ever seen Diana Burson present, I know she presented at this last JNUC and I think Octane as well this year. We went out and we hired her, and she totally implemented Casper in the best way for us. And in that, she also built us a great self-service option, which has evolved quite nicely, as you can see. In our self-service, we have things like links to internal travel booking systems, HR systems, submitting a ticket. Those are along the left-hand side. We use it for things like distributing Chrome extensions, which aren't required but can make people's lives easier, like the Robin extension for room booking. And currently, what we're doing to take it to the next level is we're working to implement self-service through Okta and set up the ability for teams and the leads of teams to actually be able to approve their own requests, which will make our lives a lot easier, reduce a lot of tickets, because our ultimate goal that we're trying to get to, probably within the next 6 months, I would say, is that if someone starts at Shopify, they're already pre-assigned and pre-provisioned for all the tools they need and can get going day one. So you might be asking yourself, Meg, how were you guys able to take these really scrappy and really crappy ways of doing things and start actually building for the long term without using Post-its and without using Google Sheets? Well, one thing we learned to do is we learned to deal with ambiguity. With those examples that I showed you, you can see that we have a ways to go. We're not perfect. We're figuring a ton of things out. If anyone in this room has been there or your teams have been there, you know that there's so much ambiguity that comes along with growth that it's sometimes really tricky to deal with and deal with the ambiguity of ambiguity. The other day, Charles had actually said that overnight you could add another 500 people to your company, and guess whose job it is to deal with that? It's yours. I think in our industries, people really like to paint by numbers. They love certainty. And I think change can be really unnerving for anyone, but there's a couple things that I've learned that can actually really help make this a little bit smoother for you. The first is that everything is subject to change. Growing means that you'll outgrow your tools and your processes. For some places, this occurs over months. For us, it occurred over weeks. It's all subject to change. There's no formula to predict this. Now, what we did is we took a look at each tool or system that we administer, and we planned out what we like to call the trajectory for it. So how will this thing look at 3,000 people? How will it look at 5,000 people? Or how will it look at even more than that? Will it scale properly? What challenges might we foresee with that? We did it with every single thing, and trust me, if you can devote the time to doing this, it will help a ton. The second is learn to redefine things. If we know that the tools that we use and the things that we support are going to change, chances are that probably means our day-to-day is going to change as well. That means the scope of your role is going to change. That means that chances are you should rip up your job description because the day that you start, it's going to change quickly and you will outgrow that description super fast. That's actually not a bad thing. We had a really small team at first, and we still do. It's pretty small. And that meant that people were responsible for many, many things. So it was very much a mentality of jack of all trades, master of none. And again, as Charles said the other day, the idea of a full stack admin, we were very much full stack admins, and to some degree we still are. But as we started to grow bigger, alongside of Shopify, we learned to start taking the opposite approach. We now encourage subject matter expertise on our team, and we became masters of some instead of all. No one saw this happening 6 months ago. We had to really learn to redefine what it is that our team did. And in essence, what we've become is more of a technology experience team and less of a IT team. And the third thing is you don't know what you don't know. I think Kelly called that out in her presentation this morning as well. By a show of hands, how many people here have been in a meeting or a session somewhere where someone said something and you had no clue what they were talking about? Everyone, right? It's called the imposter syndrome. Every one of us has had it at some point. That's okay, because being vulnerable enough to admit that you don't know what you don't know will actually help you grow, because chances are someone else in the room has felt the exact same way and just doesn't want to speak up. We know that sharing knowledge is actually super key in this industry, and it's kind of why we come to things like this. So I want to call out these specific 3 tools that I know my team uses. Mac admins on Slack is actually one of the first things we do for each new employee that we onboard onto the team. We get them set up and show them how to navigate that. Jamf Nation, can't say enough about that if you are a Jamf shop. We actually have spent better part of this year making sure that majority of our team is at least CCT or CCA certified, and that is a huge resource in getting those certifications. We also make sure all new hires do the Jamf 100 course. And Twitter, like Ed said, that's how we were able to connect, and I think that's how all of us are able to connect and start to actually, network. All right. So once you've learned how to deal with the things you can't see, what about the things that you can? So there's actually this fantastic book that I had read called The Gray Rhino, How to Recognize and Act on the Obvious Dangers We Ignore. It's by Michelle Walker. And when this book is brought up, most often it's in reference to the global financial crisis that happened, I guess, 10 or 11 years ago. And the concept of the gray rhino is really applicable to growth as well. This book discusses the differences between something called a black swan and a gray rhino. So a black swan, highly unpredictable, unforeseeable, it's chaotic, it's random. Maybe a black swan is a system outage. Maybe it's an update that breaks everything. All of your team members calling in sick on the same day, which, believe it or not, can actually be unplanned. You can't really predict when you're going to encounter a black swan. That's the whole point. But hopefully, you've actually learned to embrace ambiguity and learn to thrive on this type of curveball. Now, a gray rhino. We all know that that phrase, the elephant in the room. A rhino is really just as big, and it's just as dangerous because both of them are ignored. And gray rhinos can be predictable, they can be highly probable, they're capable of severe damage. They're basically your failure to acknowledge an issue with something, like failing to push an upgrade or for something despite knowing there may be some security vulnerabilities. They're the reaction and the result of a reactive mentality, not a proactive mentality. They're right in front of you the whole time, you totally neglected them. So those examples I gave earlier from my team, how were we actually able to fix them? Like I said, we knew that they were coming, but we kept ignoring them and hoping that they would go away. Well, the first thing we learned to do is don't do nothing. I know this seems really obvious, but knowing that these gray rhinos often go ignored, we had to be really real with ourselves in identifying the opportunities that we had as a team, pointing out our weaknesses, and putting a plan in place to fix them. Basically, what we did is we acted like owners, and we learned to stop a rhino in its tracks before it ran over us. The second thing we did is we learned the nature of the beast. What are we dealing with here? What are the risks if we change this thing? What if we implement this tool? How will our users be affected? Basically, it's good QA. There's really no excuse for not doing this. And the third thing we did is we planned our Safari really, really well. We started to create a system of resolving our issues through things like projects and sprints, which normally you might not find on an IT team. Maybe you find those on a development team. But this actually allowed us to stop neglecting problems and get a lot of work done very quickly. Again, I can't say this enough, become proactive instead of reactive. The quote that I'd said earlier from Tim Westergren, it's a long and often uncertain journey. Start building for the long term now. I know I'm giving you a lot of advice here, but I promise you, despite this amazing advice, some things are still going to break. But what if I were to tell you that there are things that you're going to encounter in your journey that are going to break, some things that won't break at all, but that the most important things that you will encounter will get stronger each time they're broken, kind of like a muscle? That's the concept of anti-fragility. It's something that we really align with at Shopify, and I'll get into that a little bit more later, but to understand the concept of anti-fragility, what you need to understand is that it centers around the theory that if you live your life in a way that allows you to be open to, but also embrace chaos and shock, you actually benefit from it, and you grow much faster than someone that does not. So when I had said earlier that most of us like to paint by numbers, that's actually fragile. You avoid change. You're living in a constant state of fear of what if something happens? Guess what? You're not growing. The opposite is to be robust. You're strong. You stand up to shock well. Nothing phases you. You go with the flow. You actually may think that this is the ideal way to be, but it's not, because you're not benefiting from any of those disruptors. So again, you're not growing. Neither being fragile or being robust is actually conducive to growth at all. But anti-fragility is. So the quality of anti-fragility is actually something that has, I guess you could say, it's propelled the progress of humanity, right? Like you've got evolution, economy, AI, things like that. And for my team, repair management was one of those. It took a ton of examples and times of us designing something, breaking it, designing it again, finding out it didn't scale well, breaking it again, and so on and so forth, until we finally built a solution that actually worked for our team and would scale well. The example of Get Shit Fixed I gave you earlier, that's just version 1. It probably will evolve over time as we realize it's not suiting the needs of our team anymore. At Shopify, we love failure. We literally give high fives for it. I don't know how many people in this room can say this, but my workplace gives me high fives every time I screw up. It's amazing. So the larger that your team is or your company is, the harder that these unexpected events I keep talking about will actually hit you, and the harder they will impact you. But that's okay, don't worry about it. Get right back up, get shit done. You learn something. There's a few things to keep in mind with anti-fragility. The first, pretty self-explanatory, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The second is don't try to predict the future. Just prepare for it. Remember, to learn to operate without the full picture, without all the details, spot that gray rhino and come up with a plan to handle it before it gets closer and closer. And the third thing is don't reinvent the wheel. Using those communities I discussed earlier, like Mac Admins or Jamf Nation, or conferences like this, they make us all anti-fragile. They help us break things and rebuild them together on a daily basis. So the TLDR, in the event that I lost you when I was talking about lazy rivers and drinks with umbrellas, let me recap a couple things for you. We learned a little bit about ambiguity and how being able to act without all of the information, about how being uncertain and being more comfortable with risk can actually help you, not hinder you. Learn to get comfortable in those rapid waters because they will actually take you to where you want to go quickest. And second, once you get comfortable with dealing with unknowns, learn to spot the gray rhinos before you trample or they trample you. And the third thing, we learned about anti-fragility and how disorder and volatility can be a good thing. Introduce a little chaos into your day-to-day and stop painting by numbers. Maybe try to give yourselves a high five when you start failing. I recently saw a presentation from Molly Graham, who's the VP of Ops at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is quite a mouthful. She gave a presentation on scaling, and she said that scaling a team is a privilege. If you're in the position of having to hire someone to replace you, take on some of your work, you're actually doing something right. Scaling a team is a privilege. So for all those moments where you felt like maybe you weren't keeping your head above water, try to remember that growth is actually what got you here today, and it's actually what's going to get you to tomorrow as well. Thanks.